Most people who study Edgar Cayce's prophecies focus entirely on the chaos years, the breakdown, the dramatic earth changes and economic dissolution and consciousness rupture. But Cayce actually described what comes after those waves with equal specificity, and this is where his vision becomes genuinely hopeful rather than apocalyptic. Around 2032, he said, a new form of governance would begin emerging in America, not imposed from above by reformers or revolutionaries, but self-organizing from below, from communities that had learned to function together during the crisis years. He called it the council system. In multiple readings, he described how this would manifest. Communities, particularly those that had maintained coherence during the dissolution period, would form localized decision-making bodies. But these would not be governments in the traditional sense. They would not operate through legislation and enforcement. They would not be based on political ideologies or party affiliations. Instead, they would be composed of people recognized by their communities as spiritually mature, not elected through campaigns and voting, but naturally acknowledged as wisdom keepers. People who had demonstrated during the crisis that they could remain grounded when others panicked, who could hold vision when others despaired, who could facilitate collective discernment rather than imposing personal agendas. Cayce said these councils would not govern, they would facilitate. They would hold space for communities to make decisions through what he called unanimous recognition of truth, a process that sounds impossible until you understand the premise behind it. By 2032, enough Americans would have completed the consciousness rupture that a new form of collective knowing would be possible. Not voting, where 51% override 49% and half the community remains resentful, but a form of telepathic consensus where solutions that serve the highest good of all would become obvious to everyone simultaneously. If you are hearing this and thinking it sounds like science fiction, I understand the skepticism, but Cayce was describing a natural evolution of human consciousness that had been documented in indigenous cultures and mystical traditions for millennia. The ability to perceive truth directly, not through debate and argument, but through spiritual attunement. He said America was uniquely positioned for this transformation because its founding documents, despite being imperfectly implemented for 250 years, had encoded the language of inherent freedom. That seed had been planted. It had grown in shadow, twisted by the contradictions between stated ideals and actual practice, but the seed itself was genuine. And in 2032, after the fires of transformation had burned away everything false, that seed would finally germinate in ways the founders themselves could never have imagined. A nation governed not by force, but by wisdom, not by power over, but by service to, not by control, but by facilitation of each soul's highest unfolding. Here is where Edgar Cayce's prophecy becomes deeply personal for many of you watching this video right now. In several readings from the early 1940s, when he was asked about the future of America and humanity, he spoke about a specific generation of souls who would begin incarnating around the year 2020. He said these were not random births. They were souls who had spent multiple lifetimes preparing for this exact moment in human evolution. He called them bridge souls, beings who had incarnated at other pivotal transition points in human history, who had experience holding space during collective transformation, who had developed, over many incarnations,